So we're almost at the end of the entire, we're almost at the end of RICET. So we hope that it was not only insightful but informative, and our final panel discussions on competencies will be moderated by Mariana Cardona, the Cybersecurity Officer for OAS. So please welcome Mariana and our panelists to the stage.
Perfect. How's everyone doing? Are we ready for the beach? Yeah? I know we're the only thing that's between you and the beach, so we hope we can give you a very insightful discussion. And our panel, as Karen was mentioning, is about cybersecurity competencies and strategies for skill development. So a little bit our idea for this panel is to explore innovative methods, like, for example, gamification, the use of partnerships, internships, for example, to drive skill development and the strengthening of cybersecurity competencies by individuals and organizations. So the idea that's a little bit of the topics that we'll be discussing today. And focusing also on the roles of academia, of government, on the private sector in this process, to align cybersecurity competencies to current and future cybersecurity roles. So it's a very important topic nowadays, especially considering everything that we've discussed throughout these 2 days of conference. So first, before we begin, allow me to introduce our speakers. We have with us today Angus Smith. Angus is the head and has been the head of the Trinidad and Tobago Cybersecurity Incident Response Team for the past 8 years. He has been involved in cybersecurity and ICT for over 20 years and is responsible for managing a very dynamic team of professionals to address incident response, operationalization of cyber threat intelligence, and conduct cybersecurity vulnerability assessments at a national level. Thank you so much, Angus, for joining us today. Next, we have Bradley Wolfenden. He's the director of cyber sports at Katzcy and Play Cyber. Bradley, in this role, his main responsibility is the oversight and management of the US Cyber Games program, which is now entering its 3rd season. And he looks forward to contributing his expertise in cyber education, workforce development, cyber ranges, individual and team training, and competitions to this panel discussion. Thank you so much, Bradley, as well, for joining us. And last but not least, we have Randy, who has participated very actively today as a moderator and in many, many different roles, as you saw this morning. So thank you, Randy. Randy is the Associate Director for Cybersecurity Policy at Florida International University's Jack D. Gordon Institute for Public Policy, where he oversees international cybersecurity capacity building efforts in Latin America, the Caribbean, and the Balkans. So thank you very much, Randy. And well, to start, I think I would like to start with a question that is very important and that I get asked a lot especially by young students, for example, and people that are trying to get into the cybersecurity field and don't really know where to start. So for you, what do you think are the most critical cybersecurity competencies and skills that are needed for today's cybersecurity professionals, especially considering the current threat landscape? So I don't know if you want to start maybe with Bradley.
Sure. I think a lot of the conversation today that I've heard has centered around the technical side of competencies. And oftentimes, some of the soft skills are sometimes referred to as power skills to get neglected. So while so much of cybersecurity can be quite technical, there's a lot of programming, there's a lot of data analysts, we can't forget about some of the interpersonal connections and being able to communicate what's happening technically to a more general population. So things like teamwork, communication, leadership, these things are massively important when it comes to performing in these roles. Of course, we hear a lot about the emergence of large language models, ChatGPT, BARD, et cetera. So future-looking competencies will likely revolve around artificial intelligence, machine learning, et cetera. But I'm a big stickler for a lot of those soft skills and the importance that they play in the workplace.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. I often think of this in the cybersecurity careers in the context of a baseball team. I'm Cuban, so I grew up playing baseball naturally, right? And you have different positions. You have a pitcher, you have a catcher, you have outfielders, infielder, second base, third base, shortstop. There are different roles. And I think part of it, and we do this growing up and we don't consciously think about it, is, I'm best suited to be a pitcher. Or I'm best suited to be an outfielder. right? Because we recognize internally what those skill sets that each of us individually have. And I think we need to find a way to kind of link those positions in the context of cybersecurity to say, you know what, I'm not a good programmer. You know, that's just not me. But what I'm really good at is really reading, sifting through information, analyzing that, and moving it towards a greater good, right? And go more towards the cyber threat intelligence space, things. So I think the understanding of what the positions are, because we are really good at self-reflecting of the things that we are good at, and we want to do more of that, because if you're good at something, you feel good, right? It makes you feel happy about yourself. So with that, I think the idea is understanding that skills and competencies go across so many different fields, and just really realizing what are the twos that you really need. Regardless of it, however, I think we're going into this world, and we're living in this world, that everyone, no matter what your job is a cybersecurity related job. Why? Because you're utilizing technology, you're connected to the networks, you're responsible for protecting your organization, yourself, your family, etc. So what are the skills that then you need to be able to have that goes across all the different positions on the fields? One, certainly the ability to protect yourself and have that cyber hygiene and that awareness of the threat. But two is the ability to communicate what you're seeing. Because I don't care what kind of programmer you are, or what kind of forensics analyst you are, or what kind of threat hunter you are. If you can't communicate what you're seeing to those in your organization or your leadership, then you're completely missing the boat. So going back to what are those skills that you really need, I think self-awareness, understanding of the cyber environment, and the ability to communicate what you're seeing.
Yeah, so to mirror what my fellow panelists have said, soft skills, very important. And over the time, me starting incident response and leading the national CIRT, I have seen the diversity of the requirements in essence. Going from just thinking about it as just a technical space where you're just dealing with, let's say, vulnerability assessments, a little bit like that, you would do that kind of technical skills that you require. It has devolved into a lot more of the soft skills one. Communication is really important because generally everything you find, you have to actually communicate to somebody in terms of what the threat was, what happened, what the incident was. It would be from a spectrum of people in the context of top levels, from ministers to maybe even your prime minister, down towards even just the layperson. You have to express that and express it in a way that they could understand and relate it. And then comes some of these skills like law and auditing and compliance and policy development, and you would get into risk analysis and risk assessment. So the broad range of skills is really diverse in terms of having a team. You would have to now get them to a place where what they're good at, one, what they might like in the other part of it too. So it's all these little factors you have to look at in the skills development. And it's really diverse. And I think Kerry in the panel before said it happens so fast. Really of late, we have to get into the ICS space in terms of OT and that type of technology. So it's really fast changing in the context of the skill set you require and what you have to upskill yourself in. So that has been happening over time.
Thank you. And I think going off of that point, in order to develop these cybersecurity competencies and strengthen, once you have, for example, a team, what do you think should be the role of each of the different sectors? So government, academia, private sector, what is the role of partnerships in this sense, and what is the role that each of the sectors should take in this endeavor? We can start with Angus now.
So the roles. Government has a role in the context of trying to ensure that you have the competency, in the context of having the framework set up to create the place, even for the trained persons, to have a place of employment, to have a space of employment, one. Academia in the context has to understand what is required as a country and their country in particular. Now, academia to a certain degree has a driver in terms of economic stability or economic sustainability. That then dictates what they might want people to study and at what level. That has to still tie back into what is the country's requirements based on the country's national strategy in the context of what would be important to them based on economy, their resources, what is the main drivers or benefits to the country itself. And that should help to dictate what academia especially would bring, even the non-governmental stakeholders, the funding agencies. They all have to relate that to what are the particular country's requirements. and then tie the development, the educational aspects, what courses they bring forward, what training, to now help them develop in their particular space, culture, that kind of thing. So it would be that, their responsibility to understand what that particular country requires.
I think from an academic perspective, it's really interesting because typically we have a culture of we educate, and our educational programs and our curriculum should suffice in the ability to provide a person that's ready to be molded by the private sector or the government. But it's a new age. And I think the first conversation that we had about skills-based hiring and, you know, different workforce development initiatives that go beyond just traditional academia, the big push is we need so much workforce, we have so many vulnerabilities right now, we need to move them quick. So where does that leave academic institutions, especially universities, four-year universities, higher educational, you know, advanced, you know, graduate studies and things like that? It leaves us in a precarious position where we have to change, which for academic institutions, it's not easy. It's like moving a ship, right? You can't just turn on a dime. There's a process to doing that. So academia is really looking internal to themselves today to say, okay, are we having impact? Or is our business model different now? You've seen it with COVID, and it goes beyond it. Everyone's online. The request for degrees is a lot lower than it was before. And enrollment numbers all across the world are dropping. Because why are you going to go into debt? Why are you going to take additional time when you can go and get paid right now? So the business model has to change, and it's on responsible organizations and academic institutions. And FIU, we're doing this now, which is, hey, let's work closer with private sector. Let's work closer with government. We know that there's often going to be a 6 to 12 month gap by the time someone gets hired to by the time they're ready to really contribute towards the mission of an organization. So instead, why don't we bring in professors of practice? Why don't we bring in folks like Bradley and Angus and Mariana to come teach or help us build that curriculum that's going to shorten that 12-month gap to maybe 3-month gap? And now you're getting someone that's better prepared, someone that's ready for the workforce on day one, and academic institutions now have a place in the system as opposed to being separate from these other entities with the hope that you're able to get them hired.
Yeah, and I would add, I think cyberspace was largely birthed out of the government. You know, a lot of the first cyber professionals were military focused or participating from the Department of Defense perspective. And as such, a lot of the competencies were originally sort of defined and built by the cyber mission forces across the world. And we're seeing that change. You know, the speed that emerging technology is released and becomes available really emphasizes the role that the private sector plays in this, and the commercial, the businesses that are producing these systems, these tools, these technologies really have to support that and kind of guide the direction. And I think from an academic perspective, one thing I believe Rodney mentioned this earlier in his fireside chat was cybersecurity is part of math. Cybersecurity is part of history. Cybersecurity is part of all of these disciplines that we learn in the classroom, whether that's a first grader, a fifth grader, a 12th grader, or someone pursuing a PhD. And really, the academics have an opportunity to relay that cyber is everyone's job and find ways to relate cybersecurity practices into lots and lots of different disciplines and start to build some of those connections between the technical and the business, between the technical and the law, between the technical and medicine, agriculture, all of these other industries that are hugely impacted by the emergence of these technologies. So it's an interesting kind of shift from something that was really dominated by federal governments, multinational governments and organizations to bringing in the commercial sector, and academic is largely playing catch up and trying to figure out that role.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, Bradley, is very interesting, is the concept of verticals and horizontals, right? The verticals are, you're going to get into this degree program or this certification program or whatever it is to build, hey, I am a computer scientist, or I'm an electrical engineer, or I'm an information technology professional. But what are those horizontals? And those are the competencies that we're talking about, right? That go across regardless of sector. We talked about the Marriott example or the Hilton example, putting Alexas in hotel rooms or putting, different devices in cruise line ships. it's very important. You need to have an awareness and understanding across that. And those are those horizontals that we got to talk about building as an academic institution beyond just the traditional vertical academic program.
And continuing on that, and I think it's something that actually, Angus, I really like your point on what does the government need, and thinking about the requirements on the government of the specific country, for example. So talking about that, what do you think are the different challenges that you think or that you faced in terms of aligning these cybersecurity competencies that we need to build in terms of the different industry and government roles that are needed and the industry and government requirements, as Angus was mentioning, and what have been some of the best practices or the strategies that you've seen in your work and your different organizations?
Well, I could start in the context. So I kind of go back to an example. There's a educational institution in Trinidad that wanted to do a cybersecurity program. So what they tried to do is create a master's program. Now, being from the CIRT and looking at what we required in the context of it would be, no, salaries is always an issue, and you know that that's an issue. So thinking about it, the persons who would study a master's would be somebody who already has a employment. They're already at a certain level with an expectation of a salary at a particular level. That always is a challenge because they come with their preconceived notions of how life and work is supposed to be. Wherein that cybersecurity takes a little bit more flexibility. You want somebody you can kind of train and mold and get them to understand this is a somewhat different field, for want of a better word. It takes a little bit of flexible thinking. You have to be a little bit innovative. So we kind of recommended, well, look, a master's program may not be the one that could attract students from the secondary school. You need to bring a program, maybe a BSc or something a little bit like a year-long program, that could actually put them in a space. They could get an internship, they could go and start that journey to see if cybersecurity is what I really want to do, because cybersecurity takes some dedication. Getting it into the weeds, as they would say, would take you that kind of level. You need to have a passion, you need to be passionate about it, you need to really want to do it, because it can get frustrating at times. Maybe like any other job or occupation, but it really can get. So you really have to get that competency and skills that at that point to focus them on what you want to do or what the job requires. And that may be the challenge in the context of them understanding that or liaising or interacting with the persons in the field, like myself, who in the CIRT or the operational persons, and saying, look, these are the type of skills that require, this may be the type of person you would need to attract, and make a program that is affordable across the board, that you could really attract that type of person towards being, in essence, upskilling is always something that would continuously happen throughout the life of the cybersecurity professional. So you wouldn't get the perfect person, and generally you don't. But it's really getting them that starting point so that they could identify that I like this and I want to continue to do it.
What's fascinating, I always thought about this concept. Does everybody know the concept of the aptitude test, right? You usually take these in grade school, and it says you're really good at this and you really suck at this, right? And it's supposed to help mold you into a specific career pathway. And we do this oftentimes very early on in grade school, and it kind of pigeonholes us a little bit. I threw out this concept of fake aptitude test. Give an aptitude test to just anyone, especially young kids. I think Rodney talked about, career exploration starts in middle school. So give it to middle school kids. And it doesn't matter what they put, say, hey, you'd be really great as a cybersecurity professional. Think about that, though. We like being told we're good at something, right? We like that reaffirmation that says, hey, you have the potential to do this. You show skill sets that can do this. And that gives that initial confidence to say, hey, you know what? Let me look at cybersecurity again. I never considered that, right? And that's why I love the stuff that Bradley does, because you're taking a portion of the population that's traditionally enjoys gaming, enjoys tinkering, playing with puzzles, doing things, and now you put them in an environment where they're not just, applauded for doing what they're doing, but they're awarded for doing what they enjoy doing. So I think we need to think about it a little different and try to instill confidence within it, because that's another motivating factor, in addition to the pay, in addition to the mission orientation that many of us have because you're serving your countries. That confidence that, hey, we're doing something that we're really good at. And I always thought about how do we encourage it from an earlier perspective as opposed to using aptitudes to oftentimes discourage going into a field like cybersecurity.
Randy's over here stealing my thunder. I was going to mention gamification and aptitude tests. So we great minds think alike. I think the aptitude component is important. It is critical. I think as sort of an experience that many young people have in taking some sort of assessment like that, where they can get a better feel for how they gather information, how they make decisions, and these are all aspects of the aptitude that really matter in cybersecurity. And furthermore, what kind of role in cybersecurity you can pursue. And when you're able to sort of match those inherent, intrinsic sort of personality characteristics with the many different roles that exist within the field of cyberspace, not only are they then turned onto a career path where there are many open jobs, the pay is quite good, you can oftentimes work remotely, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They can match that with something that they're interested in. And they find out what they're interested in through getting their hands on the keyboard, by exploring various technical games. And the gamification aspect of it, specifically from the US Cyber Games perspective, a big component of our program is the fusion of esports, athletics, and cybersecurity competitions. And young people, they love playing video games and they love playing sports. And so we see a lot of this inspiring new and different populations to consider a career in cybersecurity. And so when you start to pair the aptitude with the gamification, and they can start to identify, hey, I really like this forensic stuff. I'm on social media all day long. I'm looking at where these photos are taken. I'm looking at who's out of town when. Okay, perfect. You're a great fit for this specific work role. Hey, I'm a rule follower. I'm all about a checklist, and I want to see, yeah, check, 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 check. Okay, great. Maybe you're going to be in the auditing space. So these are massively important components to kind of bringing that.
And, oh, sorry, Angus,
Right,
go
so I
ahead.
just want to add, so because I didn't want to kind of steal the gamification part, so we did 2 schools, a girl and a boy schools actually, and we did capture the flag, and we encouraged them to do that. And actually what came out of it, so the CSIRT did that engagement, we went to them to the capture the flag event, and what we realized came out of it, one, you see the thinking of them, how they took on the exercise, how they actually got to the end of it, and some with some very innovative thinking ideas, things that we didn't even think about, they came up with in some of the instances. And in another school, like girls' school, we actually, some of them came up, about 2 or 3 of them came up and say, oh, I could decide to do this cybersecurity thing. It's something that seems to be interesting and want to definitely take it up. So it really sparks, as you say, it would spark that fire in essence for them to go forward and do it. And it's something that in Trinidad we are trying to pursue in terms of having a capability and capacity development program, but targeting secondary school just before they graduate to go to college, so they can make that decision as to, do I want to go straight to college to do cybersecurity, or what, in terms of taking it up in that regard. So yeah, it works.
And I love that too, because it also emphasizes a lot of those kind of soft skills and the teamwork aspect of cybersecurity, and how do we all play together as one cohesive unit. So in addition to developing the technical skills, it really reemphasizes, what role do I play? Mm-hmm. Taking the baseball field approach, right? Am I the catcher? Am I the pitcher? Am I the coach? So good stuff.
I think going off of that, actually, Bradley, what can you tell us a little bit about the program itself and how you incorporate these elements of esports and cybersecurity and athletics, and how you're trying, because I think it's a very interesting way of making cybersecurity fun, and as Angus was saying as well, making people that would traditionally see cyber as, oh no, this is something that's for nerdy people, it's not me, like demystifying the cybersecurity field as well.
Yeah, so the US Cyber Games program is a workforce development initiative, specifically in the United States. We receive some federal funding from the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, as well as the Department of Homeland Security, CISA. Our primary demographic is 15 to 25-year-olds. And as I mentioned, a massive emphasis for us with the US Cyber Games is the fusion of esports, athletics, and cybersecurity competitions. You can go on ctftime.org and see that there's CTFs happening every weekend. There's all kinds of esports leagues that you can join. So why not start to bring some of those core activities that these young people are doing together and pair them with the technical skills that will then position them for some of these jobs in their future. And the program itself works, we set up a season, and so this is where some of the athletics components come in. So we start with a tryout, essentially. It's called the US Cyber Open. It's a 10-day long capture the flag event. We have a beginner's game room for folks that have never participated in a cybersecurity competition in the past. Great place to solve your first challenge and just kind of explore and network with some like-minded individuals. And then we have the competitive CTF. From there, we then invite individuals into what we call the Combine. And it's modeled for those of you that are familiar with the National Football League. There's the Combine where young athletes come and they demonstrate their skills. How high can you jump? How big are your hands? How much can you bench press? These sorts of things. And for us, with the US Cyber Games, we're putting these young individuals through a series of assignments, both individual, small groups. They're solving technical challenges, but they're also interviewing, and they're writing applications, and they're submitting their resumes, and these kinds of things. Ultimately, just this past Monday, we had our draft day, where we've selected the 30 young folks that will represent the United States on the US Cyber team at international competition. And I see one of my colleagues back here in the back, Karina, nice to see you here. The US Cyber team will train between now and next summer with our coaches and mentors to compete at the International Cybersecurity Challenge. That'll be the third International Cybersecurity Challenge. And this past year, there were approximately 67 countries that were represented across regional teams. And so it's a massive workforce development initiative. Now, in terms of the effect of gamification and the aspect of esports that comes into it, a lot of our competitions are live streamed. Our draft this past Monday was live streamed. You can go on YouTube and see that. But more so, it's further kind of tying these threads together around the roles, around the teamwork, around the passion, the dedication, the communication, the leadership aspects that are so important. And with esports oftentimes, and gamification as well, it comes down to being awarded. It's about how many points can you score, what position are you on the leaderboard, and these types of things. So that's kind of our approach with the US Cyber Games. We're in our third season, yeah.
That's amazing. That sounds great. Can you tell us a little bit about any success stories that you've had, for example, or any? Yeah, we love success stories.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Many of our success stories are obviously from our athletes' perspective, right? These young individuals from 15 years old to 25 years old, they're looking for a community to be a part of. So just offering them that space is a massive success story. Several of our athletes, we're in our third season now, we've had 50 US Cyber Team athletes sort of graduate from the program over the first 2 years. This year we'll add another 30 to that mix. Many of them have been recruited by a lot of our partners and sponsors. So folks like Microsoft and MasterCard and Battelle and some government agencies as well, of course DHS CISA and several others. They're actively recruiting from our pipeline of young athletes, and we do call them cyber athletes. And I would say, one success story that was quite recent is, in addition to the US Cyber Games and the US Cyber team, we run a pipeline program for young folks that are interested in becoming part of the team, but they might not quite be there technically, or there's a little bit of a gap from where they are in the US Cyber team. And so one of our pipeline program athletes from our Season 2 campaign started an internship with DHS CISA last summer and has been hired on full-time to start their career straight out of high school as an 18-year-old.
Wow. That's amazing. That's great. And when opening up to Angus and Randy as well, can you tell us a little bit about other innovative strategies, for example? I know, Angus, you mentioned CTFs and internships, for example, or any approaches that you want to share, any success stories maybe?
I think one of the biggest things that I'm seeing a lot more of is work-based learning approaches. And Mariana, I want to hear from you here because I know you've done a lot of work on apprenticeships, right? This idea of apprenticeship model and other work-based learning approaches, and how do we better integrate it, particularly within academic institutions, in our curriculum. So one of the things we've done at FIU, we've done a number of things, but one of the things we've done is we started to do work-based internship credits. So you're working, let's say, for Microsoft during the semester, and you're getting academic credit for doing so. So you're doing a job, you're getting paid, and you get credit because, frankly, you can learn a lot more in the workforce than sometimes you can do in a classroom. So we'd much rather them do the real work, get that experience, build that resume, and they're getting college credits associated with it. Obviously, they still have to kind of keep a journal, write a paper based on their experience, so that way, you still have that academic rigor associated with it. But that's a really interesting approach that we started taking. The second thing is we essentially created ecosystems. And we realized that, and FIU, again, at one point we had 61,000 students. Right now we're about down to 47,000 students today. Still, again, makes us one of the top 10 largest universities in the United States. What we've done is taking a group of folks, these, you know them, you've gone to school with them, the overachievers, if you will. We call them in the military hard chargers, right? The folks that are really adamant about this, I know this is what I want to do. So we created a fellowship program. And it incorporates essentially 4 components. The first is obviously academics. You need the strong foundational knowledge. But the classes are being taught by practitioners, people in the field. Some have PhDs, some don't. And why do they want to teach in our program? Because they're at that point in their career where they're either going to retire or are retired, and they want to give back. And we encourage that because they can do that. With that moment, obviously they're teaching the courses, they're also providing mentorship. So all of our students in our fellowship gets paired with a mentor. And this is someone that helps them with their research, someone that helps them with their hands-on skills, someone that just provides an understanding of the culture and subcultures of the field, right? Because you need to know what field you're going into. And frankly, cybersecurity is a tough field. The mental health and mental stability that often is challenged by the day-to-day activities, and I feel bad for folks like Angus that this is literally all you're doing is you're putting out fires, right? Third component is the hands-on skills, and this goes to it's one thing to learn about a topic, it's another thing to do a topic, right? And that's why you're incorporating the hands-on skills, hands-on keyboards, hands-on screen, and then finally, the professional development, right? And I think this is really underappreciated, right? So how do I write a resume? Well, we teach them, hey, when you're writing a resume for a cyber threat intelligence position, go to the NICE framework, pull the knowledge that you're learning in classes, pull the skills that you're doing and doing the hands-on to it, and if you've had any of these internships or apprenticeships, get those tasks that you're doing and add that directly to the resume, because now a company's going to read those and be like, yep, this is exactly what I need. So we help them build a resume. We teach them how to tie a tie in many cases, right? JCPenney does a JCPenney day at FIU, and they bring down suits for $50. And often I'll have my interns or people that I've worked with, and I'll go and I'll give them money so they can buy their first suit. And that's why we help them out. So that professional development, that hands-on skills, that academic foundation, and of course, the mentorship is extremely important. Mentorship for me in my career has been extremely important. So we certainly encourage it with others.
Yeah, and likewise, to echo your sentiments, that constant learning while you work is very important, because, I mean, as a team, we have to experience a lot of different technologies, different systems, it's always changing. So that constant, we have to identify the different courses they might have to participate in and constantly keep doing that. It may not be a formalized program, but it's just really constant. So I engender that type of environment that allows them to constantly keep learning. And that is one of the things as a team. Motivation and to keep them going, you need that. So you need that aspect of that. We can learn, we could keep abreast with the technology, we could adapt to new systems so that they wouldn't be out of place when we have to treat with incidents that involve the technology that you would see from time to time. And again, all the threats are always changing and they're ever changing. So they must be always up to date. I think in our field it's a little bit a must. You have to keep abreast all the time, and again, you must be in an environment that encourages that. Even though you're working, and you might think that, well, it's kind of twofold in the context of you're constantly working, but you still have to keep learning. But it's a challenge that a lot of times, and it goes back to what I said before, if the person has that drive and that willingness to, this is what I want to do as a career, they actually find ways to do the learning and actually perform the tasks also. And that is something you see. So, and I think I'll go back to the other panel talking about the identification of the personality. That is a big part of cybersecurity. Not everybody cut out for it. And you need to identify that.
Mariana, I want to hear from you in terms of what you've been seeing, particularly on the apprenticeship work-based learning side.
No, I completely agree with you in terms of what's needed. It resonated with me a lot, actually, in terms of the need for soft skills, the need for communication, for professional development. Actually, that's one of the main points that we try to promote a lot through our workforce development programs, especially with young students, because what we see is that you can be the best in terms of technical skills, but then if you don't know how to communicate that, or if you don't know how to reflect that in your CV, or you don't know how to answer a question in non-technical way when you're in an interview, for example. We always try to tell our students, for example, when you're getting a first interview at a company, even if it's for a cybersecurity role, even if it's for a technical role, maybe the person who's interviewing you will be from human resources, not from necessarily technical. So you need to learn how to communicate technical skills or technical things to a non-technical audience. And I think that's one of my main points. Especially, we like to say a lot that you need to communicate things in a way that even my grandma that knows nothing about cybersecurity can understand what you're saying. So I think that's a main point, and professional development too. The amount of times that we have students that we ask them for their CV when we're selecting for our courses, for example. So the amount of CVs that you see that they of course, they don't have practical experience yet, but they don't know, for example, how to incorporate academic experience into a CV, or how to put their skills, even like their technical skills that they know. So I always tell them, I'm not a genie. I don't know what skills you have. You have to make sure that they're clear in your CV, for example. So I think those things are very important, and also the mentorships and having a role model. And that's why also I think in terms of the diversity and what Natalie was talking about before as well, making sure that we also have role models that are that people can resonate with. So that's why it's so important also to have women in cybersecurity, and also diverse of races, of nationalities. I think that's definitely very, very important. And I think going off of that, how do you think, as we were discussing, because it's a field that you need, as Angus was saying, continuous learning as well. So how can we promote this continuous learning in cybersecurity in our different organizations? How can we use partnerships, for example, with different sectors? Because I also think that sometimes our main issue is that industry, government, and a public sector are not, industry, government, and academia are not speaking enough to get out programs that speak to the needs of the government, as Angus, you were saying, or needs of the country, or needs of the industry, for example. So what in your opinion are maybe strategies that you've incorporated for this continuous learning in organizations and individuals?
Yeah, I would say, again, and I would add two more players, non-for-profit organizations and civil society organizations, right? I think they're important components, and you're trying to fit them all closely, and it's a very, very difficult balance. But I think that's where that mutual language, what is that, sheet of paper or sheet of music that we're all reading from, and how do we make sure that we can talk across, countries and across borders, and, share the best practices? And part of that is being open. For any private sector partners in the room, build genuine relationships. I have a saying, and anybody watching, for former students or people I work with, I say it all the time. I'm gonna get tattooed on my chest one day. It says, build relationships, not contacts. We all have contacts. How many of you have 100 LinkedIn connections or 1,000 LinkedIn connections? How many of you genuinely have a relationship with? Right. I'm not going to tell stories about Angus and I in Singapore, but there are some really good. But these are the experiences, and I was telling Allison earlier, my favorite part of these events and activities is the networking and the engagement and the opportunity to get to know someone on a deep personal level. And private sector entities often are limited in their ability because their demand and their success is based on numbers. We need to get more business. We need to reach this many customers. And that's okay. You can do that. But there's a concept in business called capture management, which is that building of the relationships with the understanding that if I get nothing from it, at least I built a new contact and network, and I never know where that's going to be. 5 years from now, you know what? Oh, yeah, they were great. I love that person. We had a great relationship. I want to now partner with them. The business will come. Mm-hmm. But there has to be an intentionality in genuinely building a relationship. And we started doing that with good companies that are like-minded organizations to say, we have things to offer that are not money. And then from the academic perspective, we need to be able to say, hey, we want things, we don't want money. We always want money, don't get me wrong. But we want something beyond money. We want your expertise. We want your experience. We want you to come recruit from us because you and I think liked. So I always say, you know, if you're willing to have a beer with me, you're more likely than not to give me some money too. So how do we build those relationships? And we've worked with industry to do that. We've worked with government to do that. You know, the CAE community is a good way to bring our community together, holding events and activities like this. And just, I would encourage each and every one of you, buy your neighbor a drink when you finish up here. Go buy him a Bahama Mama or whatever we're going to do. But have a conversation that goes beyond what can you do for me and what can I do for you. Rather, who are you? What do you do? Hey, I like that. Let's work together towards that same goal.
Yes. So fundamentally, relationships is what's important. And at the end of the day, from a national state perspective, we have tried to create more partnerships with a lot of these vendors, providers who have learning platforms to really try and disseminate that towards our constituency, and that's one of the things we're working on. So in the context of providing that level of training and the upskilling, we say, okay, we realize they all have learning platforms that they want to offer. So we want to take that and use that not to disseminate content. At least it's more focused on some of the skills that you would require, especially technical skills you would get from them. The other skills you have to kind of work around, because when you start to take things like international diplomacy and law and policy and then gender affairs, it takes a different spin, which is kind of harder to get training or get access to that. But nonetheless, the relationship I would take away is one of the more important things, establishing that and using those relationships to help build, because money is the problem. But in the context of, as a CIRT, we try to take advantage of the opportunities presented and then use that to disseminate, to help build capacity in the context. So that's one of the things that we try to do.
And I think from the U.S. Cyber Games perspective, there's quite a synthesis of the government aspect, the commercial aspect, and the academic aspect. And how that's reflected in our program is we really leverage our partners and our sponsors, because similarly, we're always asking them for money, and so we'd like to give back to them as well. And so we reach out to the Microsofts of the world, the MasterCards, those that are investing in the program. We ask for their sort of guidance in designing some of the competition challenges, for example. You know, one story from our Season 2 campaign is we worked closely with MasterCard to design what we called a scrambled scrimmage. And essentially, MasterCard set up a virtual environment for us to run a competition. We broke our athletes out into small teams. There were 5 of our athletes on each team, and each team was paired with one MasterCard representative that worked in their security operations center. And they participated in the competition together. And it was fascinating to see the dynamic. I think a lot of the MasterCard employees came into the competition thinking, we're going to be doing all the heavy lifting, we're going to have to explain all this stuff to them, and you know, it's going to be a little bit of a drag. It was a Saturday, they weren't so excited about it. And they got into it and they saw that the skill level of our athletes was quite significant. And so it became such a wonderful sort of observation to kind of sit back and watch. It was live streamed, so I got to watch it from home. To see this partnership really coming together. And MasterCard designed the environment based off of a lot of the roles they're looking to hire for. And so when they're able to give that kind of input to sort of structuring the capture the flag challenges or the attack defense environments, it really gives them that tangible kind of deliverable that they're looking for from a recruitment perspective. And they can say, hey, I was on this team with these 5 athletes and we solved this specific set of challenges, and these challenges are relevant to our mobile app for all of your banking or for ATM withdrawals or whatever the case may be.
I think that's really interesting, and it's definitely very important because it highlights the need for talking to each other, no? Because we need to know from industry what are the roles that you need, from government what are the roles that you need, for example, in an incident response team, and from academia be able to develop the programs that will later match those roles. And because if not, we're developing competencies and we're developing graduates that will later go into the marketplace and realize that they don't have the skills needed for the market, no? But I think also one of the very important topics that Angus and Bradley were touching upon is limited resources. Yep. So how do we develop these competencies and this continuous learning with limited resources? And I think your comment to private-public partnerships is definitely very, very important, because it allows us to do this. And going to our previous point as well of not reinventing the wheel. For example, what you were mentioning with MasterCard, there are so many programs already out there that I think it's important for us to also promote these partnerships, talk to the people that are already doing the mentorships or that are already doing the capture the flag exercises, which, by the way, I realize we mentioned a lot, and maybe some of the people in the audience might not know what they are. So, apologies. CTFs, or capture the flag, or cybersecurity exercises. I don't know, Bradley, if you want to explain a little bit more.
Sure. How many of you have participated in some kind of capture the flag or cyber exercise? Okay, quite a few. Excellent. So when we're talking about capture the flag competitions specifically, you can almost think about it as like a Jeopardy board. Are you all familiar with the game Jeopardy? Have you seen Jeopardy? Okay, so across the top you have your categories, right? So in our case, we operate in 5 core categories. We have cryptography, we have forensics, we have a category called PWN, which is similar to binary exploitation. We have reverse engineering and web. Those are the 5 categories that we operate in. Within each category, you will see a set of challenges that have been designed or developed by the competition organizers. And those challenges may take 10 minutes, those challenges may take 10 hours, and they will require various skill sets in order to solve them. And so when we're talking about a capture the flag competition, specifically those that can be impacted by our partners and sponsors, they're looking to build challenges that relate to one of those categories, but tap into the technical skills and test those skills in competition.
Thank you. Thank you, Bradley. And on that note, I think in terms of not reinventing the wheel, it's important to know, I think Randy had mentioned it before, the NICE framework. Because in the NICE framework, we have these roles already, we have the skills, we have the competencies, and I don't know, Randy, if you want to...
Sure.
I'm sure Rodney did discuss it a little bit more, but...
Yeah, no, and again, the NICE framework, this goes to your larger point, Mariana, which is there's so much things out, there's so many things out there, whether it's training opportunities or programs or, you know, platforms or reference guides. The NICE framework is one that I love because there's 52 different work roles. There's 7 categories and some more subcategories and then 52 work roles, but they're pretty all-encompassing, and they have a series of knowledge, skills, and tasks that are built in for the different work roles. So if you're an HR professional, you can build a job description usually in a NICE framework, and it's easier to hire specifically that. If you're an academic like myself and you're building curriculum, you use those knowledge units and you integrate those skills into your curriculum, and you build it in your syllabus so your student knows. If you're a learner, you figure out what you want to be, that position on the field, and say, hey, I really like this cryptography stuff because I'm really good at puzzles. Okay, what can my cryptography and puzzle-making skills help me align to cybersecurity specific roles? And the NICE framework would do that. And the NICE framework is translated into Spanish and Portuguese and Haitian Creole and Ukrainian and a number of different languages around the world, so you could easily adopt that. Or for many of the countries, and this is something that we're doing in the Balkans, is saying, well, we don't necessarily need 52 work roles, but we really need these strong 8. That's good. Use the NICE framework, adapt it to your specific domestic content. And it's easily available there. There's so much free stuff. Google, in partnership with ISC Squared, launched a program, a Cybersecurity Fundamentals Certificate, free of charge for students enrolled in a program. There's free stuff out there. Google just announced $20 million for cybersecurity clinics to do, you know, concept of like law clinics, but for your local communities. There's so much free things out there, certification training, micro-credentials, badges, there's so much out there. And this is why engaging and building those relationships, because just in these past 2 days, I've heard about 4 different programs that I had to Google, and now I'm very, very, very interested in getting involved with them. And I'm sure you all have done the same, right? So look for resources, engage with your partners, because you'll hear about things that you often haven't heard about. So how many of you have heard about the cyber games before?
A few.
Couple, right? You've now learned about a new program that's available. Did you know that there's a Latin American and Caribbean team that competes every year in that? Right? So you look towards these kind of features and things that are available, and again, you just go in, and that solves a lot of those cost issues that we have, because there's a lot of free resources out there. And also, I think, in general, if you do good, the money will come. It really will. I've experienced it firsthand. Just do good work, care about making an impact, care about positively impacting people's lives. Leave the door open behind you instead of just close it behind you, right? We often get competitive. Open the door. There's enough for all of us. right? And lift each other up, and the money will come. It really will.
I think, Angus, your perspective here is very interesting too, because coming from an incident response team where usually resources are limited, not only financial resources, but human capital as well, and the work that you do is so relevant for national security, national development. So what is your perspective here to maintaining this workforce and to retaining the talent as well?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges, and I know that I have some fellow incident response managers here that would share that sentiment. It's all about, you have to be resourceful, one. You have to take advantage of the relationships and partnerships that you build. You also have to create an environment for your talent to in essence, give them that flexibility, looking at what they desire, what are their strengths, and encourage them to grow and blossom. Now, national incident response is a little bit different than maybe an organization. The diverse nature of what we do covers a broad spectrum. Now, if the person's, your staff is really into cybersecurity and wanting to make a difference, it tends to attract them, and money might not be the incentive, because I have examples of that money was offered and no, because of the nature of the job. The flexibility to do, again, to grow, the flexibility to keep constantly learning and widening that spectrum and providing, again, something for your country in essence. So it's a combination of factors that helps to keep talent. That being said, they may have what we would call grown-up responsibilities at some point in time. And that is the thing that may keep persons or make persons leave and go to another job because of the salary issue. So you would have that the younger persons, and what I've discovered is that the younger persons, fresh out of college, fresh out of school, you might get them to stay longer given the right environment. When you get them coming into cybersecurity after having job hopped for a while, it's harder to keep them because then money becomes the focus, as opposed to what can I do to improve my situation or the country in essence. So you have to really balance between hoping that you attract the right type of persons. That's why I am a believer in the right type of person is very much important, and then giving them that opportunity to grow, upskilling, constant workplace learning. All of that is fundamental so that you keep them incentivized and going on. It's only that combination so far has worked. I mean, in the context of, because before, right, so just quickly, I mean, second iteration of staff. I mean, I started, got staff, lost all, got fresh staff. And actually in a position now that I have a really good team. Decent is not the word, a really good team. And because, again, of these things I've learned over the time, what you need to do, how you need to pay attention to your staff and ensure that they do learn and they do grow and that kind of thing. So it's really a learning experience, one, but that is one of the things that as a CIRT manager and as a national CIRT manager, you really need to kind of take advantage of the opportunities, as I said, and then just let people grow, and mentorship is really important. So those are just some of the things that I have learned over the time, and that helps to keep staff when you are challenged when it comes to money and pay.
I think we also need to kind of shift the conversation to say, what is the cost if we don't do this?
Yeah.
Right? So how much, I think, Brian, you said, what was it, 3.5 trillion, in terms of total, cost of a cybersecurity risk. So if you have the cost associated with the cyber threat and the cyber attack that hit. You have the cost if you spend 6 months in trying to hire somebody, now you're paying overtime or you're burning out your employees, which will ultimately cost you in the long run. You have the cost of providing, if you don't provide the proper training, then your systems are increasingly vulnerable, which means it's going to cost you even more money if you get breached. There's so much cost associated with not doing these things that we often forget that. We're like, oh, we need more employees, but we don't want to shift our culture to be a more inclusive culture. We don't want to shift our culture to be one in which we provide these training opportunities and the ability to have lifelong learning and to understand to say, I'm a good leader. I'm not necessarily going to be able to keep this person, but how do I put them in a position to succeed and mentor those that are coming up in that peer-to-peer mentorship. So the cost of not doing these things and not changing and not shifting is going to be exponentially higher than if we're just continuing doing the same thing over and over.
So I just want to add a little bit, and I agree with you. The challenge in the Caribbean especially, one, quantification of cost. Yep. In the context of how much would it cost really if a cyber attack hits, especially around government, that is really kind of hard in the context of to identify, which then translate into persons not understanding what truly is the cost of not doing it. Yeah. So when you have that challenge, then it doesn't really make the impact in terms of why do I need to do this? Why do I need to really focus? Cost of training, and even with training, So if I train persons and I give them that training and they leave tomorrow for the private sector, what happens? So we get no training. So, but because not understanding the cost of what would happen if you do nothing. So it's that segue for countries like us who are smaller economies, smaller countries. We have that challenge of how do we really truly identify the cost of a cyber attack or cyber breach or incident, and then translating that to the need for action and the need to dedicate resources into staff, into everything else. So it's really what was that, catch-22?
Exactly.
Yeah, so no problem.
I don't know, Bradley, if you want to add anything there. Or...
I think coming back to a point that Randy made, and in my opinion, it all kind of starts with that common lexicon that the NICE framework provides. And whether you need the 52 work roles or you need the 8, it doesn't matter. And sort of using the NICE framework as a tool, and I say tool less as a checklist and more as a template to really kind of build, and this panel is about competencies. So when we're talking about competencies and having that common language to speak about them, it is massively important. And in order to really demonstrate upon competencies, you need to have data. And that's kind of how we look at it from the US Cyber Games program, is we're constantly collecting data on our athletes and their participation in various competitions, in their completion of assignments as part of the program itself, and using that to drive a lot of their development and sort of the training plan that we put forth. And then on the backside of it, when they're looking to pursue a career, where they're taking their accomplishments from the program and presenting them to a hiring body or a hiring manager, or adding it to their LinkedIn profile, being able to clearly identify, I solved this cryptography challenge and I have this specific skill using this specific tool, and all coming back to the workforce framework from NICE, and having that as a crutch where we can take a look at, okay, these are the 16 challenges that we put forth in this competition. Each of these challenges has a very set list, defined list of tested skills, and then mapping that to the framework and giving those athletes an opportunity to then say, okay, this is something that I've done, this is an experience that I've had, and it really empowers them to kind of take that technical learning and communicate it in a way that the hiring managers may be familiar with, even if they don't have a technical background.
Exactly right.
I think that resonated with you, Randy, a little bit.
Yeah, no, amen.
I think that's also the need, and I think Rodney and well, you and Carrie covered in the fireside chat as well, and the need of how do I attest to the knowledge and the experience that I have through certifications, through CTFs. How do I do that? How do I explain to the hiring manager and put this in my CV that the knowledge that I have is real and can be backed by something?
I'll give you an interesting example, and this isn't FIU, but Miami-Dade College was doing this, and they were doing a CTF type environment. Again, it's in a sandbox, but one of the things they were doing was they would record the activities of the student. And what that does is, imagine like a photographer. Anybody do photography here? I see a few photographers in the back taking pictures, but you have a portfolio, right? You have your pictures, you have your things, and you show this to your potential employer, and they say, oh, you did a great job. We're starting to do that in cybersecurity too. And it's an interesting trick to be able to record what these individuals are doing on the computer or outside of the computer, record what they're doing, and then show this to an employer to say, I can tell you about what I can do, or I can show you what I can do. And I'll tell you, that kind of impact during a job interview would be absolutely incredible.
Mm-hmm. Just to piggyback off of that comment from Randy, if you're not familiar with the National Cyber League, definitely another resource to check out. I think the National Cyber League does a phenomenal job about giving, they call it a scouting report. So there's 2 seasons that they offer every year. It's the fall and the spring, and coming out of that, they have an entire breakdown of everything that you've done in that competition that you can hand to an employer or hand to the director of your program at school, and oftentimes receive some academic credit for it. Now, when it comes to the data collection process, there are quite a few platforms out there that will record down to the individual keystroke, what these individuals are doing in the environment. Part of what we're looking for in the US Cyber Games program isn't necessarily the actual keystroke, but it's really looking at these various categories, aligning them with the work roles and the 33 specialty areas.
There you go. Thank you.
And then leveraging our mentors and our coaches to then help these athletes translate that and talk about it actively in an interview process.
Yeah, so going to that technical interview once you get past the initial HR interview or inversely.
Yeah, I was just really thinking about it in the context of HR, and maybe a lot of us might experience that in the context of HR personnel, not understanding the technical nature of the job and the true dynamic of what the tasks we require, and then quantifying that to, well, why would you hire the person one, and then take that into translation in the context of pay and salary, and how do we translate that as, is this person worth X or Y in the context of and agreeing that they have the skill set required to do the task present or the job description, again, and their understanding of the particular job description. So we as technical persons might write the job description, put it forward, but the HR person has no clue. Absolutely not a clue. And then their interpretation of what cybersecurity is IT translate into a different understanding. So that's really a challenge. And even looking at the NICE framework, again, developing, in essence, a criteria by which you could now establish this is what this means, this is a rating of what the position requires, the technical aspects of it, and giving that to a scale or understanding, and maybe having training for HR persons to understand this is the requirements and this is what it means in cybersecurity, and the level that is required for skills, that kind of thing. So it's just that thought came to me in the context of a real challenge that we have at times.
No, and that definitely is a challenge. I think one of the stories that I liked when talking to students also was that sometimes the job positions also, they, for example, request 10 years of experience in a new tool, for example, and the tool has only been out for like a year. Yeah. So I think it's definitely very important also talking to each other within organizations, technical with non-technical, with HR when you're trying to scout talent, to make sure that the positions that you're putting out there actually reflect the work roles and the characteristics that you're going to need in those work roles. And adding to that, again, what Natalie said before, making sure that the descriptions are also applicable to diverse candidates as well, because sometimes as women also, I think the imposter syndrome is definitely out there. And it's been studied that when looking at a job post, men, even if they fulfill 50% of the requirements, will still apply, but women, if they don't fulfill 2 of the requirements, they don't apply. So I think sometimes that is also very important, having that diversity mindset also from the get-go, no?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'd like to take credit for this one, but I can't because I didn't come up with it. But Mark Montgomery, and those who are familiar with Mark Montgomery, he was the head of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, a big commission in the U.S., bringing in, academic industry partners and together to come up with, cybersecurity policy framework for the U.S. And he came up, we were having a conversation, he said, it would be really great if we did a hiring in cyber for a college of business that does HR management. So we took that to heart, and the first thing we did is we contacted our college of business, who has a master's in HR program, and we started integrating hiring and building job descriptions for cybersecurity as part of our courses. And this is what I was talking about earlier, the flexibility of the academic institutions and certainly training providers need to be flexible to be able to say, hey, we recognize that we have a gap. You recognize that you have a technical description, but now the HR person can't translate that. 1, you need to have better meetings, but 2, how do you train up that HR professional that's going to be responsible? Because we can't just go to the cop-out of, well, the HR professional doesn't know what they're doing. Well, it's not their responsibility to know cyber. It's your responsibility to articulate what you actually need for your team. So we built that as part of our courses now. It's going to be an official course at some point, but right now it's just a learning module within the larger HR program. But that's one of those things that was absolutely genius, and it's like, why didn't I come up and think of that? Because it's so important.
That's great. I think it's definitely very important, and it highlights the need for collaboration as well, right? Not even between organizations, between sectors, between countries, but also within.
Yeah.
I think now we are ready to wrap up. So I don't know, I like, this was a trick that I learned last year in a panel where I was participating, but I really liked it. So if you could each give me a tweet summary of what we've discussed today, and I can give you a couple of minutes to think about it, but if you could leave us with a tweet about maybe best practices, strategies, that a little bit of what we discussed today, what could it be?
I'll give my colleagues a little bit more time to think because I got my tagline that I'll reiterate again. Build relationships, not contacts.
I like that.
A good collaboration and relationships.
I'm going to go with just play.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We got the applause early, but thank you very much, Bradley, Randy, and Angus for your participation. I think it was definitely very insightful. Yes.
I did just want to make one more comment. Randy brought it up, but there is a Latin American and Caribbean team that participates in the International Cybersecurity Challenge. And one of my contacts in the back, Karina, if you want to raise your hand. If you have questions, she has represented the Latin American team in the past. And I would certainly recommend that if you're interested in learning more about how they recruit and train and develop their team, and then ultimately send them to compete alongside the other regional teams, reach out to her.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bradley.
Thank you, Mariana.
And anyways, now we can applaud our great panelists.
So, exit stage.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can we get a warm round of applause for the entire day 2 for RICET and the symposium? Whew, we have made it. It is just about time for us. We have some refreshments, some light refreshments in the back, so if you want to get some drinks or some snacks, we can head to the back and get some of those refreshments. If you are ready for beach and Bahama mamas, right? Take your cookies to go, do your networking, and we can head to the beach. So thank you from the entire team for putting on the Cybersecurity Symposium and RICET. Once again, round of applause for the entire team and the hard work of everybody. And we can now make our exit. So again, in the back, grab your refreshments, and we'll see you at the next one.